I'm Ron Patterson with Utah State University Extension in Carbon County. Today we're going to plant some Swiss chard. Swiss chard is a leafy vegetable that is quite a treat. It can be used in salads, or like spinach or beet tops, it can be boiled and you add a dash of salt and vinegar or lemon juice, and it really is quite nice. So we're going to plant a little bit of chard here. We can do it two ways. The nice thing about your leafy vegetables is that you can plant them in a wider row, and that will actually save you some space in your garden because you don't have so much footpath row space in your garden. So we'll plant these in a wide row. We'll do it two different ways. We'll make furrows and then we'll make a flat wide bed. Now to do your chard in furrows, you just take the corner of your hoe, make a line in the soil just like that, and if you want to do 2 or 3 rows together, chard does very well in a more intensive growing situation. So try to get my row straight. There we've got our rows made. It's important when you're planting seeds that you have enough moisture for the seeds to germinate. It's been very dry this spring. This last winter has been very dry in our country. And so every year, unless you have just a really wet spring, it's not a bad idea to put a little bit of moisture in the bottom of your furrow so that you've got good soil and moisture contact with your seed. One thing I like to try to do is to plant my crops that have about the same depth of root in the same rows, so when I irrigate, I can irrigate the same depth. I don't have deep-rooted crops like your corn or your squash plants. Those are fairly deep-rooted crops. You put those with something like spinach or chard or lettuce, which is a fairly shallow-rooted crop. You have to water for one and the other. They're a little bit different. So it's a good idea to plan your garden so that you have similar root depths in the same area. Now, crops that would have similar root depth to chard would be things like your beets and your spinach, your lettuce, onions. Those types of crops are shallow rooted. Beans, peas are fairly shallow rooted crops as compared to your corn, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash plants are deeper rooted crops. So when you think about clustering crops together, that's what you want to think about, is how deep are they going to be. Now the Swiss chard seed looks very similar to beet seed, and it's just kind of a cluster seed, and so it'll pop up. You think you got it planted pretty thin, and you'll wonder, why did I get all these seeds cluster up together? And it's because they're kind of clustered together as a seed. It's not one seed, it's a cluster of seeds that you've got in here. So you spread them out, and if you have to thin them, you can. We scatter these seeds up along the rows. Another nice thing about Swiss chard is with its colored stems. If you buy one, say for example one with red stem or multicolored stems, they're actually quite an attractive landscape plant. So you could plant them in a flower bed. You got this nice coarse leafy, colorful leafy thing in your flower bed that you can actually eat. So you can eat your flower bed if you wanted to. Okay, so now we're going to cover them up. When we talk about thinning the chard, the Swiss chard and the beets or spinach or anything like that, of course you want to wait until the seedlings have popped up and you know you've got some things established. You cover these with about 1/4 inch. They're pretty good hardy seeds. They'll pop up through it. Hopefully we won't have to water this again until they pop up. It should take about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks for these seeds to pop up, and then we can go through. If we want to thin it at that time, we can thin out the seedlings and space them about 2 to 4 inches apart, and that would be plenty close. Again, pat these down a little bit so you got good soil contact with your seed. Now if I don't have to water this, we won't get a crust form on top. These seeds are fairly hardy though. If they do get a a soil crust form on the top. They should be able to pop up through there pretty easily. Now, another bed system that you can do with chard is just to make a wide bed and kind of scatter the seeds out. To do that, you can use the backside of a rake. The planting schedule for chard in the upper elevations of Utah is probably late April, early May would be fine. The soils have warmed up typically by then that you'll get good germination. If you're down in the Wasatch Front area, you could bump that up by a couple weeks. St. George a couple weeks earlier than that even. You could be planting chard in mid to late March in the St. George area. So to do this wider bed, it's kind of a scatter bed. You just use the back side of your rake. My ground's not exactly level, so I'll pull it down a little bit, and that will make it so that when I water this ground, it'll puddle and soak down evenly across the whole bed. So that's about all it takes to make this kind of a bed. Now I got to get some water on it. Alright, so again, just like the furrows, the soil is pretty dry. I need to make sure I've got good moist soil there for the roots or the seeds to contact and grow down, get germinated and get going. I want to make sure that it soaks down fairly evenly. So if I put in to this bed a half to an inch of water and let it soak down, that'll give me a pretty good, reasonably deep water pattern for the roots to grow down into. Now we'll let that soak down and then we'll be ready to plant some seeds. The nice thing about chard is that it doesn't bolt when it gets hot during the summer, which means it doesn't go to seed as readily when it gets hot during the summer. Towards the end of the summer you may get it to form a seed head, but spinach will tend to, it's kind of an early season crop and will tend to go to seed when it gets warm in mid-June to early July. If you haven't got your spinach all harvested, it'll probably go to seed and it'll be pretty much from that point on kind of a waste. But chard is different. It can be treated a lot like spinach is, as far as you can steam it or boil it, and it makes a nice treat. But it doesn't go to seed. It'll tolerate our hot summers that we have up here in the high countries of Utah better than the spinach does. So what you do is you just kind of scatter the seed out over your bed like so. You'll have to probably thin them after they've germinated, so just keep that in mind. Cover them with about 1/4 inch of soil. Should take about 10 days to 2 weeks. Pat it down so you got good soil contact. And there you go, ready to have some more fun in your garden.